HMP Peterborough, Men, presents a troubling picture of a prison caught between determined reform efforts and deeply embedded structural failures. This review, conducted in October 2024, paints a nuanced and, at times, grim portrait of a facility still wrestling with safety, rehabilitation, and basic dignity for prisoners. Run by Sodexo and uniquely housing both men and women on the same site, albeit separately, the male estate holds up to 944 prisoners. As a reception and resettlement prison, it processes large numbers of remand prisoners, about 50% at the time of the inspection, with that figure set to rise sharply to 82%. This changing demographic has intensified operational pressure, strained resources, and created persistent instability within the prison population. One of the most disturbing findings in the review was the lack of real progress on core issues that directly impact prisoner welfare and safety. Of the 7 core concerns raised in the previous inspection in January 2024, only 2 saw what could be described as good progress. In 2 areas, there was no meaningful improvement at all. Efforts to reduce violence were found wanting. Although assaults on staff had decreased, violence among prisoners remained stubbornly high. In fact, a recent violent episode led to 1 prisoner being charged with the murder of another inmate. The prison had increased its use of restorative approaches and multidisciplinary safety meetings, but this was undermined by inconsistent incident investigations, poor use of support plans, and a total absence of a comprehensive strategy to incentivize good behavior. With only 1 unit offering meaningful privileges, the rest of the estate failed to give prisoners any tangible reason to behave positively. Drug use remains rampant and largely uncontained. Despite strong collaboration with Cambridgeshire police and the presence of 3 on-site officers, 27% of drug tests continue to return positive results, peaking at over 37% in some months. Though measures like mail photocopying and more frequent perimeter patrols had been introduced, critical improvements like installing netting over exercise yards remained unfunded and unrealised. The prison's security apparatus remains overwhelmed and reactive, not proactive. Healthcare delivery, particularly for prisoners detoxifying from drugs or alcohol, was in crisis. A Care Quality Commission, CQC, review found a direct breach of the Health and Social Care Act of 2008. Patients undergoing detox were not being monitored overnight in accordance with medical best practice. Some went 48 hours without clinical checks. Night staff recorded observations as appears asleep, rather than engaging in proper, hands-on clinical assessments. This systemic failure led the CQC to issue a formal action plan, citing serious risk to patient safety. Equally alarming was the lack of time prisoners spent out of their cells. While staffing numbers had improved on paper, with 50 new officers recruited, about 29% were unavailable for duty during the review week. Prisoners were still being kept locked in their cells for most of the day, with 54% found locked up during daytime checks. Routine delays and mismanagement meant even wing workers weren't let out until hours after scheduled unlock times. Social and personal development activities were virtually non-existent. Association rooms sat empty. Clubs, games, and creative outlets were mostly theoretical, with little evidence of implementation beyond ordering board games. No structured enrichment activity existed to support the development of a rehabilitative prison culture. One of the few bright spots in the report was education and work. Ofsted noted that the number of education, training, and workplace opportunities had increased, and a variety of new vocational courses had been introduced. Teaching quality was better, learning more targeted, and employability skills more embedded in course design. The introduction of peer mentors, particularly those trained in neurodiversity, marked a thoughtful inclusion. But problems remained. Many positions were still part-time. Wing-based work was often menial, and personal protective equipment, PPE, was lacking for cleaners and painters. Preparation for release showed signs of promise. A new head of reducing reoffending had taken up post after a year-long leadership vacuum. Resettlement support was finally being extended to remanded prisoners. The proposal to create a team of remand support workers using prison offender managers was described as pragmatic and laudable. Despite this, almost 28% of prisoners were still being released homeless, with 2 CTEC housing workers expected to support over 900 men. Leadership had recently changed, and the new director, appointed just 2 months before the visit, was described as focused, aware, and determined to tackle the prison's many entrenched problems. However, systemic inertia, funding shortfalls, and historical neglect continue to undermine even the best intentions. The review made clear, while some foundations for change have been laid, HMP Peterborough Men remains a facility where safety is precarious, purposeful activity is insufficient, and rehabilitation remains a distant goal for many inmates. In the absence of immediate investment and bolder leadership from HM Prison and Probation Service, meaningful transformation will remain just out of reach. In a stark breach of trust and prison security, a former officer at HMP Peterborough has been jailed for smuggling mobile phones into the facility in exchange for over £3,000 in payments. Paulius Juska, 36, of Clipston Walk, Peterborough, exploited his position of authority and access, forming a secret agreement with the ex-partner of a Lithuanian inmate he had befriended during the summer of 2017. Mr. Juska first began assisting the inmate, who struggled with English, by bringing him extra food and acting as a translator during appointments. What may have initially appeared as simple compassion soon turned into collusion. Within weeks, Mr. Juska made contact with the prisoner's former partner, 32-year-old Lijana Morkelionite of Cromwell Road. The two entered into a conspiracy that would run for nearly 3 months, between June and September 2017. The scheme involved Mr. Juska smuggling contraband mobile phones into the prison. Though he was initially not caught during searches, prison intelligence flagged his suspicious behavior. When investigators examined his financial records, the conspiracy quickly unraveled. Mr. Juska had received a total of 17 payments from Miss Morkelionite, amounting to £3,275, all linked to the smuggling operation. Both Mr. Juska and Miss Morkelionite admitted their roles and pleaded guilty to conspiring to bring prohibited items into a prison. On Friday, January the 10th, at Peterborough Crown Court, Mr. Juska was sentenced to 12 months in prison. Miss Morkelionite, while spared immediate custody, was sentenced to 16 weeks, suspended for 2 years, and ordered to complete 140 hours of unpaid work. The case sheds light once again on the internal risks facing UK prisons, not from inmates, but from staff members compromised by personal gain or emotional manipulation. Detectives emphasised that Mr. Juska's motive stemmed from financial hardship, but stressed that such justifications can never excuse corruption in environments meant to uphold public safety. DC Paul Twell, speaking after sentencing, stated, "Mr. Juska was in financial difficulties and he thought he could use his position as a prison officer for personal gain. We will continue to work with the prison service to make sure that all officers maintain the highest standards." For the prison service, the incident serves as a sobering reminder of the constant threat posed by corruption and the importance of stringent staff vetting, monitoring and support. Though small in scale, this case once again exposed a breach that could have compromised inmate safety, encouraged criminal coordination, and undermined the integrity of the system. One of the most chilling and unprovoked acts of violence to occur within the UK prison system in recent years, 39-year-old inmate Tony MacDonald has been sentenced to 17 years in prison for a vicious attack on a female prison officer at HMP Peterborough. The assault, which took place on July 31st, 2023, involved MacDonald throwing boiling water mixed with sugar a brutal prison weapon commonly referred to as napalm, over the unsuspecting officer as she responded to a routine emergency call. The attack was both calculated and ferocious. CCTV footage showed MacDonald emerging from his cell with a plastic bin concealed under a towel. He was seen calmly walking to the communal water boiler, filling the bin, and then waiting in ambush. When a personal alarm was triggered on the upper landing, prompting the female officer to respond, MacDonald launched the full contents of the bin at her. The mixture immediately caused second-degree burns. As she screamed in agony, a nearby male officer also sustained burns to his neck, leg, and arm. Prison staff acted quickly, rushing the female officer to a cold shower to mitigate the burns. Meanwhile, Mr. MacDonald fled and encountered another officer, whom he assaulted with a forceful knee-high kick. That officer suffered a fractured wrist during the ensuing struggle. The level of violence shocked both staff and investigators. It was premeditated, remorseless, and devastating in its outcome. Mr. MacDonald, who was already serving time for grievous bodily harm and other violent offences, attempted to argue in court that he was hearing voices and acting under the influence of delusions. However, psychiatric assessments concluded that he was fabricating symptoms to avoid responsibility. A jury found him guilty of grievous bodily harm with intent and attempted grievous bodily harm with intent. At sentencing on the 11th of February at Huntingdon Law Courts, Judge Mark Bishop dismissed MacDonald's claims and highlighted the senselessness of the attack. She suffered immediate pain, screaming in agony. There was no background, there was no motivation, he said. The officer suffered grave second-degree burns while undertaking her public duties in prison. The scarring and injuries caused her significant issues in her daily life. She is likely to need future surgery. She has permanent damage and doubts her career will be able to take her to retirement. The victim's statement, read in court, revealed the extent of her suffering. She underwent multiple skin grafts and was treated at a specialist burns unit. Her injuries were not just physical. The trauma, fear, and long-term psychological impact have altered the course of her life and career. The male officer who tried to help her described the attack as life-changing, admitting that the sound of her screams still haunts him. Detective Constable John Pentney, who led the investigation, described the incident as traumatizing and said the sentence reflected the sheer brutality of the attack. Mr. MacDonald was captured on CCTV leaving his cell with the bin, waiting for a distraction. He knew exactly what he was doing, Detective Pentney said. While the sentence cannot undo the harm caused, it does acknowledge the severity of what took place. This case underscores the ongoing dangers prison officers face daily, often without the recognition or protection they deserve. Attacks with boiling water and sugar are especially notorious in UK prisons, with the sugar thickening the water to make burns deeper and more lasting. These assaults leave physical scars and mental trauma that can last a lifetime. Tony MacDonald's 17-year sentence sends a clear message. Violence against prison staff will be met with the full force of the law, but for those living with the aftermath of such brutality, the victims, their families, and their colleagues, the consequences will be far longer lasting.